So, Primal Strength hip thrust bar has arrived. We're going to do a quick unboxing and talk you through how to build up the bar. So I've popped open the box and laid out the components. So here we have plate end, the loading peg, the caps for the loading peg, the main barbell itself, the pad, the balancing stems, the rubber donuts for the end of the loading pegs, and the 2 band pegs. So that's the components that will arrive in the box, along with all the nuts, bolts and washers that you need. Instructions for build are fairly clear. It's a simple exploded diagram showing you how the components come together to build up your hip thrust bar. So let's get building. So first step is going to be to put the weight loading peg, the band peg and the balancing stem together. It's easiest to do if you have the balancing stem set upright as it is in the exploded diagram in the instruction picture. You can then see that your loading pin is going to have to go to the outside and your band peg to the inside on each side. If you have a look at the loading pin itself, you'll see that one end is completely hollowed out and the other end has a much smaller hole for the bolt. That larger diameter hole is to accept the threaded end of the band peg that has a small bolt hole in it. So we're going to pass the band peg through the balancing stem large hole and into the receiving hole on the loading pin. Okay, so we've passed the band peg through the balancing stem and into the weight loading peg. You'll notice on the band peg there's a threaded hole. There's also a hole on the underside of the balancing stem, and that accepts the bolt that stops the balancing stem from rotating around and holds it aligned with the band peg and the plate load holder. So what we're going to do is line up this hole with the hole in the underside of the tube and pass the nut through into the threaded section to secure it. Okay, so the band peg's now passed through that hole, and on the other side of the balancing stem we're just turning in this bolt to secure the band peg in place. With the bolt tightened down to secure the band peg, we're now going to slide on the large diameter hole side of the weight peg onto the band peg. We're then going to add the end cap to the end of the weight peg and secure it with the silver M12 bolts. So we've now added the end cap to the weight shaft, secured it with the silver bolt. We've got our little retaining bolt passing through the balancing stem into the band peg, and all that remains to be done on this side is to add one of the rubber plate donuts and slide it down to protect the metal surface from the impact of the plates. Once we've got the plate donut slid down the weight peg, we're going to repeat those same steps for the opposite side peg, always remembering that the band peg will project inward towards the bar and the plate weight holder will project outward to the outside on each side. Okay, so that's the first stage of the build complete. We've passed the band peg through each balancing stem, attached it with the nut and washer, then added on the plate load lever's end cap and the rubber donut onto each side. Remembering always that the band pegs should end up facing in towards each other and the plate loading pegs facing to the outside. So that's first step complete, and we're now ready to add the main barbell. So we're now ready to attach the main bar to the balancing stems. I've laid the balancing stems out at each end of the bar, and what's important here is the alignment. We want to make sure that this handle is pointing towards this end of the balancing stem. So it points towards the end of the stem with the wheel, not towards the band peg and the plate loading peg. You'll notice on the balancing stem there's a total of 6 holes. It gives you 3 options for the height at which you're going to connect the main barbell. For 90% of people, 90% of benches, you're going to want to connect the main barbell as close as possible to the band peg, so into this hole. If you're an extremely large athlete and you want the barbell to sit substantially higher, you do have 2 other options. Likewise, if the only bench available to you is extremely high, again, you've got the option of increasing the bar height. I would suggest, however, that everybody starts in the lowest position. Pop in the bolts, just loose, and then attempt the thrust with your bench. No weights, just get it set up and check the height. If you want it any higher, you can then take it off and move it up 1 setting. If you're happy with it in the lowest setting, which I suspect the vast majority of people will be, go ahead and tighten down the bolts. So I've got my balancing stem, I've got the bar to the inside, to the band peg side. On the outside, I've got this retaining plate and the 2 bolts with washers already loaded onto them. So I'm going to pass the bolt through the retaining plate, through the lowest possible hole, closest to the weight peg, right through the balancing stem, through the plate on the end of the barbell, and I'm then going to add another washer and the nut to secure it. So that's one side now loosely bolted together. Plate on the outside, bolt and washer passing through the balancing stem and through the plate on the other side of the barbell. Always making sure that the handle here points along the line of the balancing stem towards the end with the wheel on it. Alright, so we've now got the bar loosely connected to both balancing stems. It should look something like this. The weight peg pointing to the outside, band peg pointing towards the inside, handles on the bar pointing towards the wheels, and just have a final check and make sure that on both sides of the bar you've loosely put it into the same holes. As I said, I recommend starting with the holes closest to the weight peg and band peg, giving the bar the lowest possible height increase. If you find that's too small, check it while it's still loose just now, and you can always move up to the next height setting if it's appropriate. But for about 90% of people, 90% of benches, you're going to find that the bottom setting, closest to the band peg, closest to the weight peg, is the correct one. That just leaves adding the pad, so we'll do that now. Okay, so for adding the pad, first thing to notice, the pad's a little bit chunkier than that little sponge you've been using or rolled up yoga mat or whatever else. So get prepared for a little bit more comfortable hip thrusting experience. But to add the pad, it's very simple. There is a zip running the full length of the pad. We're going to unzip that, open it up to take the vinyl cover aside, and within the vinyl cover, I can just slide that down just now, you'll find the foam pad itself has a split. So we're going to pass the bar through that split into the center channel and then zip the zip closed again. So we've unzipped the pad, opened up the gap in the foam, and we're ready to slide it onto the bar. It's just a case of just giving it a little nudge upwards to bring the bar into the central channel. Once the bar's fully into the channel, we're going to pull the 2 edges of the pad back together and close the zip. I've now got the bar all the way in to the center channel. You'll know it's in the right place because it's then very, very easy to close the pad over on itself. We're then just going to zip it down, tuck that zip in at the end, and our bar build is more or less complete. All that remains to do now is just tighten down and secure all of the bolts that we put in with Allen keys, making sure everything's nice and tight and secure, and then your hip thrust bar is ready for use. With all the bolts and Allen keys tightened down, that's our finished hip thrust bar plates loaded, ready to go.